In Midsummer Magna, a series of disturbing murders leads Barnaby and Scott to getting locked inside an empty wine cellar. Joyce was never happier. We're talking con artists.
The history of wine fraud.
And the infamous catapult murder on this episode of
Welcome to Midsomer.
Hello and welcome to Midsomer, the podcast where we dissect all the mysteries, the murders, and the many, many weird things about the long-running hit TV show, Midsomer Murders. I'm your host, Eric Buscher, and with me as always is my co-host, Eileen Becker. Hey, Eileen.
Hey, Eric. Today we are talking about Hidden Depths, the 6th episode of the 8th series. It originally aired March 13th, 2005. It was directed by Sarah Hellings and written by David Hoskins. Let's pour the bubbly.
Spoiler warning, we will be discussing the events of this episode, including the identity of the murderer. So if you haven't watched it yet and don't want to know who done it, pause this and go watch it. We will still be here when you get back.
Bernie! Is that you? What are you doing? For God's sake, call the police! Bernie!
You're in a bit of a pickle, aren't you?
Oh, you stupid woman! Do something! Call the police! Do you hear me?
Can I suggest about 5 degrees to the left?
It's a typical English day in the village of Midsummer Magna, and at Sanford House, everybody is doing something. Gardener Steve Hope works on a bench, while his wife Sarah grabs his butt and does the housekeeping. Inside, tenants Felicity Turner and Antonia Wilmot share a cup of coffee at Antonia's flat. Felicity thinks her husband Nick is worried about something, but he seems fine as he puts on a fabulous suit with a boutonniere, walks up to the roof, and his body falls to the ground in front of the women. DCI Tom Barnaby and DI Dan Scott arrive to investigate. Coroner Bullard informs them Nick landed head first, causing catastrophic head and spinal injuries. In other words, he went splat. It looks like a suicide, but there's a few unanswered questions like why did the gardener hear him calling for help? And why are there weird scuff marks on the roof? Felicity says that Nick wouldn't commit suicide, even if he had been behaving odd lately. They also talk to Antonia, who thinks that Nick might have had a falling out with her husband Jack, possibly over some bad financial advice. So next, it's off to the bank, where they talk to a Mr. Perkins, who asks if it was suicide, explaining that Nick was mortgaged to the hilt, having spent all his money trying to help his parents-in-law deal with health issues. Also, he doesn't like to gossip, but he's heard lawyer Otto Benham saying that lawyer Nick had been stealing from some big clients. At first, Nick's legal partner, Jeff Martin, denies that Nick stole money, but after review, he finds £150,000 missing. Ruh-roh. Barnaby and Scott return to Sanford House to talk to Jack Wilmot, who should be home from work, but he's missing. He never even showed up at the office. His wife's sure he will be at quiz night at the pub, though, because he never misses. They go to talk to his quiz team, which includes Otto and former game show host Mike Spicer, but they seem surprised that Jack is missing. Jane Hampton, who lives at the gatehouse at Sanford and used to work for Nick, tells them about a shady meeting Nick had with Peter Blagden, followed by a mysterious accident that left him depressed. Blagden's brother used to own Sanford House and hadn't spoken to Peter in over a decade. When they show Jane a photo of Blagden, she says that's not who Nick met with. So who was it? The next morning, Jane delivers some mail to Felicity and overhears her on the phone, laughing and sounding happy. But when Jane announces she's there, Felicity puts on a sad face. The next day, the detectives visit Otto and his wheelchair-bound wife, Bernie, at their antiques-filled home. They seem like a happy couple. Otto constantly ignores, belittles, and berates her, while she gets back at him with some lovely barbs. Otto remains calm when they ask about Blagden, but when they leave, he calls Spicer and tells him not to react when they ask him about Blagden. So what are these two covering up? Antonia seems to be losing it a bit. She talks about weird noises in the house and having dreams about Jack being trapped in an old wine cellar supposedly hidden on the property that Jack had been searching for. The only person anyone can remember who said they saw the cellar? Peter Blagden. That night, lots of things happen. Antonia finds Otto and Spicer coming out of an old barn for some reason. The detectives hit the pub again, where Steve tells them that Felicity had asked him to work specifically in that area the morning of Nick's death, which both obscured his view and was out of character. He also says someone stole the machine that makes white lines on the football pitch. But hey, that machine is being put to good use, though, drawing a giant bullseye on Otto's lawn. Someone has drugged his wine, so when he eats dinner, he passes out and is basically nailed into the bullseye using his croquet set. A masked man moves Bernie into an upstairs window so she can watch as he uses Otto's antique catapult to throw wine bottles at him. After the first volley misses, Bernie, maybe a little too happy at the scenario, offers some helpful advice about how to aim, and the next bottles find their mark. Bye-bye, Otto. All right, a little bit of tourist info. Eileen, why don't you take us to Midsomer Magna?
We talked about Midsomer Magna recently in the Seek Him Here episode. It's one of the wealthier areas of Midsomer. It also appeared in Destroying Angel, Birds of Prey, and King's Crystal. It has a village fete, an outdoor theater, and the factory of the former King's Crystal Company. Stop by the pub on quiz night. Just don't blurt out the answer, or you might find yourself locked inside the scenic underground wine cellar.
Never say the answers out loud. I don't even go to quiz night, and I know that's a rule.
I do go to quiz night, and that is a rule.
Yeah.
People will get very, very mad at you.
Hard to believe that Scott would make that kind of faux pas. All right, so the first thing we have to talk about this episode is, of course, the first strange kill, because there are two. The wine catapult. I believe this is what this episode is basically known for.
Oh, yeah.
The bullseye on the lawn, the wine catapult has made pretty much every list of strange, weird, memorable kills on Midsomer Murders that I've ever seen about. The first time I saw this episode, I was like, what the hell is going on? Do you remember the first time you saw this episode?
I do, and it was like one of those, wait, you're going to kill somebody with wine bottles? I guess if you throw enough wine bottles at somebody with a catapult, you will eventually kill them.
So the episode is really known for, I think, the kind of the over-the-top grotesqueness of these murders.
Mm-hmm.
In a way that I think overwhelms the episode in many ways. I think it's the movie becomes more of something like Saw or the movie Seven, where it's about these over-the-top grotesque ways of murder and not really a mystery.
It is more of a show about a vindictive revenge scheme than a traditional murder mystery.
Yeah. I mean, down to, again, over-the-top, very elaborate ways to kill people.
As Scott pointed out, that was not a spur-of-the-moment kill on that third one.
No. But I also would have to say is that the over-the-topness of the murders implies a bigger message. Like if you look at something like the movie Seven, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is killed according to their sin. And I'm doing air quotes because, it's like a guy was obese, so he's going to be eaten. He has to eat himself to death.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing. The same with Saw is these, like, I've only ever seen the first one, but a lot of it is sort of these elaborate morality tales. It's like, you can either, save yourself or save your wife.
Mm. I haven't seen the Saw movie, so I can't.
I've only seen the first one, and it's fine. But all these sort of elaborate death traps do tend to have, like, the premise of the Saw films is this guy. It starts off as this guy who was lied to, was taken advantage of by a bunch of doctors and promised these weird, quacky cures for his cancer, and he just basically gets his revenge on them in these elaborate traps. I feel like the killer, when the way he kills Otto and the way he kills Spicer later on, it's very clear. It's like, I'm giving a message to people. And it's like, but nobody else knows what the message is, because it's not like there was this big public thing. It was all a very private scam. So it's basically, it's over the top kind of for no real reason.
I think we can talk about this when we've kind of discussed all three murders.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is an inside joke that they're having with each of the victims. The first guy, and maybe we should talk about it after
Let's go. You know what? We'll bring up more of this afterwards. I just think overall, in the way that this episode never has any real suspects. Like it's implied that they think Jack is a suspect, but also Barnaby, pretty much as soon as that statement is said, Barnaby's like, yeah, or he's a victim.
Yeah.
Barnaby has a lot of sort of supernatural knowledge here of this whole thing that like there's no real detective work involved. And that's why I think it's a little off, is that just stuff happens and Barnaby figures stuff out, but there's no clues.
It won't be the first time he's figured things out of thin air.
Yeah. And I also kind of want to just point out, we never see the bodies. We don't see any of the three bodies really, or what happened to. We don't see Spicer. We don't see the moment of killing. No. Everything has kind of happened off screen, which I think is kind of an interesting choice.
Yeah. You see the bloody tarp that covers the first body. You see broken bottles and a bit of the body. They don't show the head. They show the third body from the back, but you don't get a picture of the face. So you don't see the faces of any three of the victims.
No, you see Barnaby's reaction, though.
Yeah.
You see Barnaby's reaction every time. He's like, ugh. Bah, bah, bah.
And Scott makes a little quip.
Yeah, Scott doing the Law and Order quip there. Otto and Bernie, couple of the year.
Yeah, love them. Loving marriage.
Yeah, Otto is just a jerk and a scam artist, and Bernie just likes the money and has put up with him. I thought it was such an interesting thing. It was like, you know, when I had that riding accident that put me in this wheelchair, and it's like, we're just going to walk past that, right? It's like this very important character thing. It's just like, nope, that's not important.
It does kind of drop hints on things. It doesn't over-explain, which I actually like, to be honest, that it doesn't over-explain everything.
I don't think it explains anything.
We'll discuss that after the second recap.
I mean, because there is a big question of why does he position her to watch this murder? There were so many little things in that murder sequence. Number one, when the killer has Otto on the ground and he just ever so gently just taps those croquets into the stakes into the ground.
Well, you can't tap them real hard. Have you played croquet?
I mean, he's not doing it to play croquet. He's trying to pin this guy into the ground.
Yeah, but they're not real strong. I mean, the wickets are not very strong.
Then why use them? Because then a grown man should be able to just pull them out of the ground.
If they're in deep enough and you don't have enough leverage, they are hard to get out.
But then again, if you're tapping them ever so gently, how are you going to get them in deep enough? Do you see my point?
Don't overthink it.
That's the whole point of this podcast.
To overthink everything?
On this show, yeah. I like that Otto is more concerned with the wine as someone is trying to kill him. Not the good vintage. How about don't kill me?
Yeah.
Maybe it was the drugs talking.
Maybe.
And then, of course, the back and forth where Bernie screams that he's in a bit of a pickle because she's enjoying this. He calls her stupid. And then she tells the killer she suggests aiming 5 degrees to the left.
Yeah. Classic line. Again,
Bernie is a true original in this show.
Yeah.
You know what? She must be related to Fleur. I liked that the first shot of the episode is a butt grab.
Oh, yeah.
Which was way more frisky than pretty much anything we saw in Country Matters. But the Hopes actually were an interesting counterpoint to Otto and Bernie, because we don't see a lot of them, but in 3 seconds we see they are so much happier than pretty much any other couple on this show.
Yeah. As you said, they are never really put out as suspects.
Yeah. They don't, like, they just don't appear enough in there.
Yeah.
Listeners, if anyone knows what's the song that's playing on the radio at the very opening of this thing, I cannot find it in line. I could not make out what the lyrics were to kind of do a lyric search or anything like that. I would be curious to know what this song is and if there was like a special significance to it. I couldn't find anything.
Ah.
It's not listed in the soundtracks. So yeah.
Okay.
Eileen, why don't you take us to your history corner where I believe you're going to be telling us about the history of wine fraud?
Yeah, there's a whole episode, another episode on wine, so we'll do the history of wine there. But this, we're going to talk about wine fraud. Because as long as humans have been fermenting grape juice, there have been people trying to make an easy buck by selling cheap crap as fine wine. A wine snobbery seems to have started early in the history of wine, and there were always hucksters ready to take advantage. The Romans had such a problem with the issue that Pliny the Elder complained that even the nobility couldn't be sure if their wine was good Roman wine or some watered-down, adulterated crap from the provinces. It was enough to drive an emperor mad if he wasn't already. And most were. Most fraudulent wines involved diluting cheaper, less desirous wine from inferior grapes and regions with water or other substances, some of which could be toxic. While the ancient Greeks had thought it uncivilized to drink wine that had not been diluted with water, most other cultures frowned on the deceptive practice. By the Middle Ages, the rich wine snobs knew what they wanted and which wines from certain regions they wanted to drink. Naturally, fraudsters were always willing to lie about the provenance of their wine to get a few more bucks for it. In London, there were laws prohibiting wines from France, Spain, and Germany from being in the same cellar to prevent the wines getting mixed together, though somehow I doubt that these laws prevented that from happening. Any merchant found selling corrupted wine was forced to drink it all. Though I'm sure there are those who would argue that drinking bad wine is the ultimate punishment, you could also be branded, beaten, or executed by hanging. Until the 17th century, wine was not bottled, and it was often illegal for it to be so, as bottles were not standardized. Glass was expensive and not very strong, so it wasn't until hotter coal fires made a stronger glass that wine bottling came into favor. The bottles were squatter, with large bases, but they could begin to standardize the size. Wine was still transported in barrels, though, which led to an adulteration which produced a whole new type of wine, fortified wine. Port, sherry, Madeira, and vermouth came about because adding a stronger distilled spirit, such as brandy, stabilized wine for transport on sea voyages from Portugal and Spain to Great Britain. While initially considered a deceptive practice, fortified wines became popular on their own and are an excellent way to end a meal. While some were starting to fortify their wines, others were out and out faking it. Champagne made from apples, quel horror! Scientific advances made during the Age of Enlightenment led to so-called wine doctors, who would fashion fake wine out of non-grape items and chemicals. Was your Bordeaux really from grapes grown in the Bordeaux region, or did it come from some slow plant grown in someone's backyard? Things got really bad with the great French wine blight of the mid-19th century, which devastated the French wine regions as well as those in other European countries. With true wine scarce, fraud grew to fill in the void. Fraud was so prevalent that many countries finally drafted serious legislation to combat it. In the UK, the Adulteration of Food and Drink Act of 1860 was passed, with provisions against the adulteration and misrepresentation of wine. Rules on what constituted wine became codified across Europe, designating it as the product of fermented grape juice. No apples. However, there has always been and continues to be debates on what constitutes too much manipulation of wine, with many practices formerly frowned upon as now accepted as part of making better and more balanced wines, and vice versa. Many of the techniques arose, such as with fortification, to stabilize wine and prevent spoilage. Wine label fraud grew out of the great French wine blight, as authentic wines were rare and very expensive. To combat this type of fraud, governments developed appellation systems that identified where the grapes were grown. However, label fraud is behind some of the most high-profile wine frauds in recent history. A German wine collector, who shall remain unnamed since he likes to sue people, claimed to have come into possession of several bottles of wine from the 1780s engraved with the initials Th.J., implying that the wines had been owned by noted Enophile and future U.S. President Thomas Jefferson. The first bottle was sold at auction for over $100,000 to Christopher Forbes, brother of sometime U.S. presidential candidate Steve Forbes. Bill Koch, yachtsman and brother of the politically influential Charles and David Koch, bought more of the bottles. When he offered them to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts for display, they could not trace the bottle's provenance beyond the German collector. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation at Monticello could find nothing in his records referring to those wines. Tests dated the wine to the 1960s. Indonesian collector Rudy Kurniawan was convicted of committing wine fraud when he was selling more bottles of rare wines than had been produced, and one completely fictitious vintage. Once again, billionaire Bill Koch was one of the alleged victims. When police searched Kurniawan's California house in 2012, they found inexpensive California wines, corks, stamps, labels, and notes as to which would be passed off as older vintages of Bordeaux. In 2013, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2020 and deported back to Indonesia. A little Easter egg put in by the writer, Otto and Mike's pub quiz team was named Chateau Lafite, one of the wines that had been part of the Thomas Jefferson wine fraud.
Did you just get us sued?
No, I did not name that guy.
We wanted a disclaimer that we have no proof or anything that the Thomas Jefferson wines are not indeed the real wines. Well, thanks for almost getting us sued, Eileen. How about some cast highlights? Try not to slander anybody.
Hey, I haven't slandered anyone.
I'm kidding. But I will say is that that one Koch brother probably should just stick with Koch.
All right, so here are our cast highlights. Lucy Russell was grieving psycho Felicity Turner. Apparently, she didn't start acting until she was in her late 20s, instead studying Italian and business at school and then job hopping until she found her calling. She landed her first on-screen role in Christopher Nolan's first film, Following, and she would also cameo in Batman Begins. 2 years later, in 2001, she starred in Eric Rohmer's film, The Lady and the Duke. Looks like her career has had some ups and downs, but in the last few years, she's had a lot of high-profile roles in Tony Erdmann, The Crown, Genius, Chernobyl, Trigger Point, Andor, and A Spy Among Friends. From her apparently self-written IMDb bio, she's worked across genres with incredible directors in French and English. She's been head of the CIA and MI5, a trophy wife, a serial killer, a UN delegate, a toxic mother, leader of a galactic empire, a cult member, generally been like a pig in shit, exploring as many facets of human expression as she can get her dirty paws on.
I mean, if that's not self-written, she's got a hell of a publicist.
James Weber Brown was dapper psycho Nick Turner. His first on-screen role was as Toby in 1996's No Bananas. He's appeared in ER, The Bill, Law & Order UK, Mission Impossible, Rogue Nation, The Rise of the Krays, The Fall of the Krays, and Silent Hours. He also does voiceover work, and one website describes his voice as warm, reassuring, and soothing. It's crystal clear, and he has a great delivery style, enveloping and empathetic. It represents luxury and sophistication, perfect for luxurious, high-end brands, as well as the corporate and documentary markets. He should sell wine.
Mm-hmm.
Oliver Ford Davey. I laugh at your jokes.
Oh, was that a joke?
Oliver Ford Davies played wine-soaked lawn art Otto Benham.
I laugh at my own jokes.
You laugh at your own jokes. He has an extensive history in the theater, appearing on stage at Stratford-upon-Avon in 1959 while he was still studying at Oxford. He had a 15-year career with the Royal Shakespeare Company and almost a 30-year one with the National Theatre. He played Polonius in a production of Hamlet with David Tennant and Patrick Stewart. He performed again with David Tennant in a production of Richard II, which we've seen. He also won an Olivier Award for his work on Racing Demon. On screen, he's had roles in Game of Thrones, Lewis, Kavanaugh QC, and Johnny English. His most recognizable on-screen role is as Naboo Governor Seo Bibble in the 3 Star Wars prequel films, which I have erased from my memory.
You know, it's amazing that probably like anybody who's on this show who's ever appeared in Star Wars, like those will, or Game of Thrones, but most like either one of those will probably be their most talked about role of all time, even if it's only like 5 minutes.
And then you go to a Comic-Con and you meet them and you talk to them about Midsomer Murders, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's something different to talk about."
I mean, you did see what's his name at the con, and he was also in that Richard II production.
Yes, Julian Glover. I met at the Comic-Con in Cincinnati, and we had a lovely, lovely discussion about Midsomer Murders as well as his role in Richard II. Yeah.
Yep.
Vicky Hops played observing housekeeper Sarah Hope. She's a character actress who appeared in Chucklevision, Professor Bubble, Watson and Oliver, and Miranda. Her last on-screen credit was Mum in an episode of Give Out Girls in 2014. Maybe she's retired. Simon Armstrong was pub owner Viv Marshall. He's a Welsh actor with appearances in the 2017 King Arthur, Made in Dagenham, Killer Elite, Shadow and Bone, and The Interceptor. But most people recognize him as Corn Halfhand in a little show called Game of Thrones. Ian Talbot played Guy Who Keeps Sticking His Nose Into Things, George. His career goes all the way back to 1968 with an appearance in an episode of Champion House. He appeared in Doctor Who, Drowning by Numbers, As Time Goes By, Run for Your Wife, and most recently, Ridley. Nikki Lilly plays Princess Diana in the video Spicer Watches. Lilly was a professional Diana impersonator who also played her on Ashes to Ashes and in the film Prince William. When she turned 60, she appeared on the show This Morning to show what Diana would have looked like if she had lived. It sparked a big backlash from viewers who called it ghoulish. I can kind of see that.
Yeah. Let's meet our return visitors for this episode. We had quite a few. We discussed Eileen Davies, not our Eileen, in our episode on Dead Man's 11. In that episode, as well as the episode Death's Shadow, she played estate agent Olive Beauvoisin. I don't speak French. This was a period where the show was trying more recurring village characters. In this episode, she also plays an estate agent that many people think is just Olive, even though she's not named in the credits, so it's probably an inside joke. But who knows? Anyways, Davies has a long history of character acting, including Sightseers, Coronation Street, and the Alan Bennett film Alleluia.
What's funny is that she had started her own, in Dead Man 11, she had started her own agency with her name on it, and now she's at a different agency. So apparently her own agency didn't last.
Or maybe the Midsomer people just like, all she can play is estate agents. She looks like someone who would show me a house.
She's very much styled as she is in the other two shows, though.
Yeah, it's clearly, I think it's clearly meant to be an inside joke.
Yeah.
Nancy Carroll was stressed out Antonia Wilmot. She also appeared in the episode The Great and the Good. Now, she graduated from the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art in 1998 and almost immediately got a role in the film An Ideal Husband, and then the role of Ophelia in a production of Hamlet at the Old Vic. She's got a ton of theater credits and won the Olivier for a performance in a revival of Terence Rattigan's After the Dance, a performance that also included some actor named Benedict Cumberbatch. Now, on screen, she's probably best known for the role of Lady Felicia on the hit show Father Brown, which I am a big fan of. I know you are as well, Eileen. Yep. It was nice to see a younger Lady Felicia in this. She's also known for her roles in Murder in Provence, The Crown, Will, and Magic Mike's Last Dance. Fun fact, we discussed her husband, Joe Stone Fewings, when we talked about A Tale of Two Hamlets, where he played the lovable Danny. Everybody loves Danny.
Everybody loves Danny.
Everybody loves Danny. Now, the two of them have actually done a number of theater productions together, including a double act of Noel Coward plays, which I thought sounded kind of fun. I just really wanted to note here that I think it's interesting she played Ophelia, because I think she kind of draws on that performance for this role. She sort of seems to there's that scene of her sort of walking in those weird, like this kind of like house slippers with the flowers on them all the way to the to Jane's place. She seems very anxious, hearing noises, all of which, she sort of seemed to be kind of descending a little bit into madness. I even wrote in my notes while watching this episode, she's got a little bit of Ophelia in her.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I do remember her quite well in An Ideal Husband and a lot of the other things she's been in. I think she's a really terrific actress.
Oh, she's great. In fact, when she stopped appearing so much as a regular on Father Brown, I feel that was, I don't know, I was a little bummed by that. Robert Dawes played long out of the spotlight Mike Spicer. You can also see him in The Curse of the Ninth. He's a Rotograd who started on screen with a couple episodes of The Squad. His first recognizable role is Tuppy Glosshop in the 90s Jeeves and Wooster series. He also starred in the popular sitcom Roger Roger and was a regular on the drama The Royal. He's also been a regular on Poldark, Casualty, and Sister Boniface Mysteries. It's a mistake they don't go Boniface. Up next for him is a horror film called The Piper, which honestly, please go watch the trailer if you need a laugh, because it's one of those films that seems very dramatic and scary, and then you see the title and you're like, oh boy. In real life, he can play the trumpet, and you can hear him perform over the credits of the final episode of A Bit of Fry and Laurie. Matthew Flynn was good buddy Jack Wilmot. He's also in Left 4 Dead. He's a native Londoner whose first on-screen appearance was in Foyle's War. He would go on to be in Lucan, Pride, Coronation Street, Emmerdale Farms, and most recently in Cobra, which is sadly not a TV reboot of the Sylvester Stallone action classic. Rebecca Charles was helpful assistant Jane. She also appears in Strangler's Woods. She's done a lot of character work, including roles in Bridget Jones' Diary, Shakespeare in Love, Mrs. Brown, and The British Office. She most recently appeared in 2020's We Hunt Together. John Lightbody was grungy Steve Hope. He's also in Death and Dust. He trained at the Drama School London and has appeared in Dalziel and Pascoe, The Bletchley Circle, DCI Banks, Treason, and Lockwood & Company. He also is currently doing a lot of work at the Globe Theatre. Caroline Leskowska, sorry if we mispronounced that, was the barmaid who can't get rid of Scott, Zara. She's also in Left 4 Dead. She's got a handful of credits, and this episode of Midsomer was actually the last on-screen credit for a very long time, until she did some voice work for the video game Anthem in 2019. She seems to primarily do voiceover work. Philip Bird was not in this for very long, Jeff Martin. We talked about him when we did the episode Crime and Punishment. I did not recognize him with hair. He's appeared in Doctor Who, Emmerdale Farm, Doctors, and most recently in Call the Midwife. He was, in the 80s, before he became an actor, the singer, guitarist, and songwriter for a new wave band called The Strips, which he relaunched in 2020, just calling them The Strips, and he releases new music on YouTube and Facebook. If you're over at YouTube looking him up, please go to subscribe to @welcometomidsomer. Robin Soanes was banker who knew way too much Mr. Perkins. You will see him again in The Sword of Guillaume. He's known for being a playwright, specializing in documentary plays. These are plays that are basically taken from a lot of transcripts and real-life events. He's done those all over the UK. He also has a long career as a stage actor at the RSC, the National Theatre, and the Royal Court Theatre. He's been in Doctor Who, both old and new, Bergerac, The Queen, Victoria, and the new film Napoleon. He appeared in the film Comrades in 1986, which is about the 18th century farm workers who were tried for starting a trade union. This film was kind of lost when it first became released, but in the last 10 years, it has become an acclaimed cult film. There's even a documentary about the making of the film. He also appeared in the 3 Princess Switch films as Elfman. Finally, Charles Millam was sorta not Peter Blagden. He's in Ghosts of Christmas Past and Last Year's Model. He only has a few roles listed in IMDb, including Elizabeth I, Hidden City, and Jeeves and Wooster. In fact, Midsomer is his final credit, and I'm not really sure what he's up to nowadays. He's hard to find online. Now, our village star this week is Sarah Kesselman, who played Bernie Benham in this episode. She's born in 1944, got her first on-screen role in an episode of Dixon of Dock Green way back in 1966. 2 years later, she would join the RSC, staying until 1973 when she left to make her film debut in Zardoz, the science fiction film where Sean Connery runs around in a red diaper. She would go on to appear in Ken Russell's Listomania with Roger Daltrey, Lady Jane with Helena Bonham Carter, the TV show Rome, In the Flesh, and Gentleman Jack. In 1994, she won an Olivier Award for her role in the revival of Cabaret. But despite all that stellar work, the role that most people will know her for, again, it's Star Wars. She is the voice of Kreia in the video game Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. Why? Because nerds. Seriously, there is a whole Reddit thread about her voicing that video game. It's what people really want to talk about. For me, she sealed her status as this week's Village Star with just the simple epic line of read of, "Can I suggest about 5 degrees to the left?" Which makes her the only accomplice to murder that got away with it that I can think of on Midsomer. Honestly, I can't think of a single other person who assisted, even in that brief capacity on Midsomer, that got away with it.
What's funny is when I watched this again recently in preparation for this recording, I was surprised how little she is in this episode, but still dominates it as an actress.
Oh my god, she is a scene stealer, and mostly because she's the only one that seems to be having any fun.
She is having a lot of fun. Everybody else is kind of miserable. And I think the way she's filmed is very, very good in this one.
There's probably only one other person having more fun in this episode, and we're going to discuss that after the break. Hey, we're back. Let's talk about the second half of Hidden Depths.
I've been suspecting that Jack was involved with Otto in some kind of... Oh, excuse me for saying this, but... some kind of dodgy deal.
Oh, please. If it involved Otto, it almost invariably was. We've just found a whole collection of faked wine labels in the safe. If that isn't a dodgy deal, I don't know what is. Come on, my dear. I'd offer champagne if there was any left, but I rather think it's all on the lawn. Ah, no, there is a bottle left. Bit of bubbly, my dear.
When the police arrive at Otto's the next morning, Barnaby is not sure what he's more disturbed by. Otto's murdered by catapult, or Bernie cheerfully eating a nice healthy breakfast. This seems like a revenge killing, and when Bernie opens up Otto's safe, they find a big clue as to why. A fancy bottle of wine and a lot of wine labels. Bernie says that Otto was a scam artist, always involved in some kind of scheme, and she's been miserable for years. The disheveled Antonia shows up, convinced that Jack was involved in Otto's latest deal. Bernie offers her some champagne. So, an auctioneer tells them that the bottle is real, but the labels are all badly faked. He also recognizes the bottle of wine as one brought to him to be appraised by two gentlemen who sound an awful lot like Jack and Nick. Antonia returns to the barn she saw Otto in and finds a mysterious locked door. She calls in Barnaby and Scott, and all three end up finding a large hidden room, the wine cellar. Then someone locks them inside. Unable to use their mobile phones to call for help, the detectives try to escape by scraping away the wood around the lock. It's slow going, and they hope that someone is going to notice that they are missing, especially Joyce. But, they don't. Now believing that Jack is dead, Antonia finally tells them that she found the room when she saw Otto and Spicer come out of the barn. Never sure why she didn't tell them that in the first place. And she believes that all four men were involved in some kind of con. Tom thinks he's figured out that part of it, and we get the first reveal. Nick was the mark for the con. Jack had been searching for the cellar for a while, but when he finally found it, it was empty. Otto came up with the idea to fill the cellar with fake wine so that they can con someone into buying it. They suckered Nick with the real bottle of wine and someone pretending to be Peter Blagden who could tell him, "Oh yeah, this is the real cellar." They then convinced Nick to embezzle money from his accounts, money that he believes is gone forever when they fake an explosive car accident that destroys all the wine before it can be sold. It's a classic con straight out of The Sting, but it doesn't explain the murders. The next morning, Spicer wakes up in his home to find his living room turned into a death trap. He's knocked out, and when he comes to, his head is placed inside a hollow TV that has been made watertight, and he is forced to play Game for Your Life, a really clever take on his old game show. So clever. I don't know how they came up with it. Jane finds the locked door of the cellar and lets everyone out. Barnaby has figured out what's happening, and he and Scott race to save Spicer, but they are too late. He has been drowned in wine. Barnaby gives us the second reveal. Nick is alive, and he and Felicity are the killers, getting revenge for these three destroying their lives. He and Jack are the same size and look alike, so Nick bought two identical suits, then knocked Jack out, dressed him, took him to the roof, and at the right time, dropped him headfirst. Felicity made sure she was the first to the body so she could claim that it's Nick, and obscure Antonia getting a good look at the face. Then Nick commits the other murders while everyone thinks he's dead, and Felicity can set up alibis for herself. Barnaby and Scott find the pair at their in-laws' house watching the video of Spicer's murder and laughing with joy. Barnaby and Scott make the arrest. Let's start the discussion on this second half with Strange Kill number 2, the TV drowning, which we actually see them assemble in sort of a lot of like little cutting back and forth, which I thought was kind of interesting. And we see him typing out the printout that he's going to do for Game for Your Life with a lovely blood-soaked font. I really want to know what font that was.
That was not Comic Sans.
No. Was it Times New Roman? By the way, why did the computer beep every time they hit a key?
It was early 2000 computers. They did that.
They did not. No, they did not. They did. If computers, like if a computer keyboard made a beep every time you hit a key, people would have been throwing the computers through windows every day.
I think Foley art is just like giving extraneous computer sounds whenever there's a computer scene on there.
It would have been raining computers. So this leads us to our discussions about the Turners. They're just psychopaths, right?
Oh, yeah. And the thing is that you would have had sympathy for them, except they were so vindictive and vicious with their killings and then laughing at the video.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like there's a pure joy in the way that they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of watching the TV afterwards and kind of really enjoying it and laughing and cuddling up together, which kind of is that weird sexual satisfaction of a murder that's one of the definitions of a serial killer. Like they get like a sexual gratification from it.
Yeah.
And that's why it didn't feel like revenge. It just felt like sadism. It felt like Seven.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not because they had to. It's because they enjoyed it.
I think they definitely enjoyed the revenge. They were obviously taking revenge, except for the one guy who played Peter Blagden, and maybe they just couldn't track him down. But
yeah. Well, they were enjoying the revenge, which is sort of like, which is that kind of thing that makes it sort of the defining line of just like revenge because you feel it's justified and revenge because you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of like Peter, Jack, and Mike did not quite fully understand Nick's tendencies when they conned him, because they just conned the wrong people. They
should have tried to con Bill Koch. That would have been a much easier mark.
Probably couldn't get him to come to Midsomer. I want to jump forward just a second. Let's just talk about the con before we get more into this, because I think to understand their motivations, you have to kind of look at the con.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a classic straight up con. If you're ever curious about like the how cons basically function, there's a wonderful book. It was written, I think, in the 1920s called The Big Con, which explains all the different kind of cons and the players involved and how they work. It was clearly an influence on The Sting, because all the cons used in The Sting are like literally mapped out in that book. But this has all those points of like, you find your mark, you convince them that they are in a unique opportunity, jack up the price at the last minute, and then you make everything is gone or destroyed or arrested, so there's no point in looking further.
Yeah.
Right? There's no point in going back and like that the money's still there or something like that.
Yeah. And there's something a little bit illegal that the person did on their part, so they can't go to the police.
Exactly, and that's what they did with Nick. But the point, and I think kind of getting to that, part of the con, and one of the reasons like so many of these con artists can like justify that they're not doing anything too bad, is that it's a free will thing.
Mm-hmm.
No one put a gun to Nick's head and said, "Hey, Nick, embezzle this money."
Yeah.
They are like, "Oh, we need this money," and Nick makes the choice.
Yeah.
And in none of this revenge is any of the culpability. Like Nick's kind of like, "Oh, they fooled me, they lied to me," and I'm like, but nobody forced Nick to take that money out of the bank account.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick's murdering all these people and kind of completely ignoring that he made a choice, and part of this is his fault.
Yeah.
And that leads to like Nick and Felicity kind of pulling a con on the con artists.
Yeah.
By making it look like Nick was dead when it was really Jack. And I think that's kind of where things get really muddled and confused in this episode. And you and I, we've been talking a little bit about this off Mike, and we have a sort of a disagreement about the effectiveness of this episode.
We do.
I think because they get so wrapped up in the grisliness of the murders and the detail of the con, but they never really make clear lots of little points in what these two did that make any sense. So it's like, for example, I'm guessing the plan was to make the detectives think that Jack was the murderer. It's never explicitly made clear, and the one time that's even suggested, Barnaby just kind of goes, "Yeah, I think he's actually dead."
Well, I think it's and he does this with a lot of things. He's like, it could be this or it could be this. I mean, he does keep options open.
It does, but they also blow right past it, and it's not like a thing that keeps getting hammered in. Like it, for that to have worked, it should have been like Jack. Like they should have left a clue at Otto's that it was Jack, and I left a clue at Spicer's that it was Jack. Make it think like it's Jack, like hair or DNA, but they don't do any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they make weird choices like Nick calls out, no, when they're murdering Jack to make it look like he was getting murdered. But you could have also done it where Nick made it look like Nick committed suicide, or you could have done it where Nick just maybe faked his death without it looking like murder.
But they needed the insurance money, and you would not get the insurance. You would not get the insurance money if it was a suicide.
But you could have done it with faking Nick's death, like at a car accident or an explosion or something.
But I think there was also I think it was much easier to be honest, to like drop somebody from a roof, maybe easier than making sure that they are killed and disfigured than they are in a car accident.
But that's also sort of a really big maybe, because like the body fell head first like that, but would that really be of how the like a body falls? And I think that's kind of the thing is that they wanted to create these really clever death traps, and it doesn't. I don't know. It just felt like they spent more time like, oh, this would be a really cool way to kill somebody, but not really focusing on the mystery part, or not really thinking like some of these things. Like I don't know. Just I watched a lot of this, and at the end of it, I was like, some of this didn't make a lot of sense.
For me, it did, because I think they were doing this basically for their own entertainment, these murders. So, and the way they position both of Antonia and Bernie to see their husbands die, even though Antonia didn't know it was her husband, was part of it, because I think Felicity would have suspected that Antonia would have had some knowledge of what her husband was up to and just turned a blind eye to it. Bernie actually admits that she did. So I think there was a small amount of, this is what you get for turning a blind eye. We're not going to kill you, but you're going to watch your husbands die. They, may or may not know that Bernie would have enjoyed it or not. But
anyone who had spent 30 seconds around Otto or listened to Otto talk about his wife would have known that they hated each other.
But did they spend any time together? I don't know.
That's just it. We don't know. Like the revenge doesn't, like you just said it. They did it for their enjoyment. Well, their enjoyment is it revenge or is it enjoyment?
It's
did
both.
Did they do Bernie there as a punishment, or did they think that Bernie would enjoy it because everybody hates Otto? Revenge doesn't even make sense. Like if the other person, like, they're getting revenge on Antonia. Well, how? She doesn't know that's her husband. Like, is the revenge that making her worry about her? Everything is sort of, we are left to conjecture.
Well, the reason is because the entire reveal is from Tom Barnaby's point of view. This is one of the few episodes, such as in The Killings of Badger's Drift, where there is no confession by the murderers, which does leave some holes. It doesn't bother me because of that, because, and maybe it's just because I spend a lot of time reading and watching mysteries, but I can feel, you fill in those holes.
I don't feel like you need to, like, this is a thing that could have been answered like with like 30 seconds, like a little less like extravagant. Like I didn't, no offense, didn't need to see them constructing the TV death trap. I could have used less TV, like seeing the TV death trap, more let's get a scene of Nick and Felicity together before the murder, or let's get a flashback of Nick and Felicity together. Like we had all that, we flash back to stuff that Barnaby never saw with Jack, Otto, Spicer. We're just gonna have them laugh like psychos at the end. So then it wasn't really about revenge. It was just two psychos killing people.
No, I think it was. I think it was about revenge, but that doesn't mean that psychos can't enjoy their revenge.
I think that there's these little weird plot holes or just explanation holes that, yeah, they could have solved if just spent a little more time doing that and a little less time on stuff we didn't need to see. The building of the TV, we didn't need to see the building of the death trap on Otto's lawn. It doesn't add anything. Whereas kind of spending a little more time with Nick and Felicity might have added something.
Yeah, I will disagree on that.
Yeah, you just wanted more. No, I get it. You wanted more grisly death traps. You're a
I
monster.
I love a good death trap. I love a good con. I mean, not on me, obviously, you know.
By the way, tell us about all that wine you bought.
The good thing about not buying expensive wines is that you never get taken on a wine scam.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of the wine, again, was Nick spending time in the wine cellar?
I don't know if those voices were just her imagination or if that was Nick doing something. Maybe because it does imply, and this I will say is a little bit of something they could have cleared up. Was Nick living at the in-laws' house that was left to them after they passed away, or was he in the wine cellar because it was a little closer to where they needed to be rather than being in Corsten?
Yeah, but then, like, if he wasn't in the wine cellar, what is the point of the noises? Is she hearing stuff in her head? Does she have again, we see Antonia sort of breaking down over the course of the episode over her husband missing, who, by the way, she loves her husband enough that, like, he's not totally a bad dude. So why the hell was he involved in this con in the first place?
I mean, he was. I mean, they do depict him as a womanizer. That's how they, entice him up there. Felicity entices him up there by, kind of promising a little R&R, shall we say?
Right. But that's just it. He's a womanizer. He's an active, he's clearly done this before.
Yeah.
Right. Had no problem involving supposedly his friend Nick in this.
Yeah.
And, knowing full well what, like, it would be destroying Nick's life to do this.
Yeah.
No problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
So why is Antonia? Because we never see Jack and Antonia together, so we never know the nature of the relationship. Mm-hmm. But she clearly seems to be in love and worried about her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Or does she just have like an anxiety? I was by the end of it, I'm kind of like, oh, so what's like? It's like, oh, I guess he's like just worried that he was dead. Like, what was going on?
Yeah, I will say it does feel like he was down in the cellar and he was the one, because somebody had to close the door, and Felicity was out at the other staying with Sarah because she was providing her with all those convenient alibis.
Right.
So I assume that Nick was in the cellar at that point, and it was only after they had killed Spicer, and I keep wanting to say Sean Spicer, but they killed Spicer, that they went to the in-laws.
Don't get us sued. How did he get Bernie up the stairs?
I heard like elevator door noises when she was being let out, and to be honest, it would make sense that there would be an elevator for her to go up and down because Otto wasn't there, and she was obviously going to bed and everything. So, I mean, they didn't show it because they were probably in that house wasn't a real elevator, but it was part of the.
Otto doesn't seem the type of guy who would have had an elevator installed in a house for his wife. He would have been like, "Oh, you sleep downstairs."
I think he would have. I think insurance would have paid for it. He would have had a good insurance.
And I just kind of like the idea of Nick having to like just drag her up that with the motorized wheelchair, kind of pulling the chair up the stairs. He's like, oh God. Or like carrying her up the stairs and having to run down and carry. Don't run away. I thought it was an interesting choice to have that flashback. That the first reveal, the flashback is lengthy.
Yeah.
It's long and detailed. And all of it stems from the fact that Barnaby just seems to instantly know how this scam worked.
He's experienced con artist.
True.
He read that book that you mentioned.
Probably. But again, he's like, oh no, they did this, and then they did this, and then they did this. Like, yeah, but, like this was instantly, this clearly was a faked seller. I'm like, okay. You're just using your intuition again. You just know things.
It's Barnaby sense.
But then again, he should have been able to know who the killer was instantly. Barnaby sense seems to have like that real, it just goes on or off whenever it wants.
But it happens in almost every episode that there's something that he just kind of intuits.
Yeah. How did no one ever find that cellar? It wasn't that hidden.
Well, my guess is that since it was rumored to be under the house, they were looking for something in the house when the entrance was in the barn, and it was probably covered up with a bunch of crap because he was moving a lot of stuff when he was doing that. So,
but that just like it was a door underground. There was some box, like a couple people, they put some boxes on it, and this other side, like it wasn't that hidden. Like if people were hunting as diligently as people were talking about, I think you would have found it a lot sooner.
Have you ever tried find your glasses when you can't find them? It's that kind of thing.
They're on my head.
The cat's sitting on them.
Yeah.
10 minutes and the cat is sitting on them.
There you go. What was Jack's job? Like he had an office.
Something finance.
If he's a full-time con man, why does he got an office?
He has some kind of job in the city that involves finance.
Where was this barn on the property? Because it seemed like it was it close to Jane's place, or was it close to the house? Somebody should have seen them loading in the wine.
I think it was close to the house, because Antonia saw parked there to go to the house, and that's when she saw Otto and Spicer coming out of it.
Which means it was everyone's parking lot. So somebody should have said, "Oh, they've got that big truck in there again, loading in those wine bottles."
They were probably very careful as to when they were doing it, because Jack would have known his wife's schedule, and I think Jay lived far enough away. I mean, it was obviously within walking distance, but walking distance in the UK is further than walking distance in the US. People, well, except for maybe New York.
What about the gardener?
The gardener they would have had him doing something else. And Sarah, I mean, you can do these things when nobody knows. People don't notice things as much as you think they do.
We had an explosion in this episode. This is like our third or fourth one.
I know. I would have
Maybe these aren't as rare.
I know. I was always thinking, gosh, that's such a rare thing to have an explosion. But, they do happen. Much more so than in real life.
Also, again, there was an exploded car full of wine bottles everywhere and apparently was never reported.
Yeah. Because that would have been part of the insurance fraud, I would think.
What kind of hours do you think Spicer kept? Because he went to bed after 2. And he was up by 6?
Yeah, I think that was my hours last night, actually. So, but I don't do it regularly.
No wonder he couldn't answer those questions. He was pretty tired.
Yeah. He was probably worried after Otto got killed because he knew that he was next.
Yep.
Which means I would have left town.
Except he really didn't seem that worried.
No, I would have driven that really nice Rolls Royce he had out of town, gotten a hotel in London.
Like, Spicer seems the kind of guy who would have been like, oh, Otto's dead, Nick's dead, Jack's missing, oh, I'm next. Like, honestly, the plot point should have been Spicer goes to Barnaby and Scott and says, Jack's going to kill me.
Mm-hmm.
because of this con. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
That would have solved a lot of problems. Instead, he's just at home listening to his Billy Big Mouth Bass that plays
Don't worry.
Be Happy.
That was a great touch. I really liked that touch. There were some nice details in the set decoration that I really liked.
His home was a tribute to him watching the video of him meeting Princess Di.
Yeah.
But the Billy Big Mouth Bass was like, oh boy.
But he would have had that. That kind of guy would always have a Billy Big Mouth Bass.
Yep. So detective work in this episode, as I said, there wasn't really a lot of real detective work in this. In fact, pretty much this kind of ties into corner because Bullard was only there for an info dump.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this episode is basically just people giving him information to save time. The banker just flat out tells him, oh yeah, their parents-in-laws were very sick, and so he had to take a lot of second mortgages and he's broke. Like, how do you know that? How do you know all that? Nick's partner does the deep dive of their case files to find the missing pounds.
Mm-hmm.
The coroner just gives him kind of like quick, like the coroner is the one who finds out about the suits. There's a lot of like time savers because they have to spend so much time with these death traps.
Yeah.
Scott's little bit of detective work on this is hitting on a barmaid who didn't want him to.
Oh, yeah. I love that he got the lame car, broken down car excuse.
Which he was thinking about. He was like, that's my normal go-to, and then she gives it to him. But so she had a boyfriend, but he was. Do you think it kind of like? So he was just being really icky and pressuring her to have a date with him, which is gross.
That is kind of gross.
Scott's a gross dude.
Well, I do like Scott in most episodes. This one, he is a little gross with his. I think it was tried to be played as kind of humorous, but as we know these days, it's not really humorous to have a guy continually hit on you that you don't want to hit on you.
Or force you into a date.
Yeah. Using
the power of his office to force you into a date.
Yeah.
And Barnaby, who knows better, when Scott tells him, I'm going to ask the barmaid some questions, like, see what you can get. Like, you know what he's going to do.
Yeah.
Don't criticize him later if you know what he's going to do and you okay it.
Yeah.
That makes you part of the problem. This gets to home life, which I think is one of the funniest home lives we've ever covered.
Oh, yeah.
It starts at the top. Barnaby ducks out on painting the house to investigate this murder. And Joyce reminds him that he's coming to this big dinner party, that he's like, I will be there, probably. And we all know he's going to miss it.
Yeah.
Because he gets locked in.
Yeah. Yeah, she's really mad at him early on in this episode because he's left her to do all the painting in the house.
And then ditches her for the dinner.
At least he didn't abandon her mid-meal this time.
Yeah. Wait, what do you think is better? Leaving halfway through or just not showing up at all?
I'm not going to make a distinction. They're both pretty awful. But at least she had a cab all lined up to go to the meal, to the dinner party, to the big event.
Don't you think there was a missed opportunity there where the cab driver's like, didn't show up again?
I just loved that she had the time of her life.
Loved it. Flirting, dancing, drinking.
Yeah. Taking home a rose and putting it in a glass of water beside her bed.
Yep. I was kind of like, maybe she just is like, this episode, I don't need Tom.
Yeah. Joyce, you are a strong, independent woman. You can live your life on your own terms.
Maybe that's why we've never seen them come back, mostly just because like they would have divorced because I can't handle him being home all the time. He's such a buzzkill. Barnaby has that great line, Joyce will be having kittens, it's 2:30.
Yeah.
And she's not. She doesn't even notice.
Nah.
Or do you think, okay, so do you think that bit where she's talking to Scott on the phone, Is that because she never noticed he didn't show up, or she's so used to him not showing up, or she's just super angry with him and being passive aggressive?
I think it was the latter. I think it was I am not even going to pretend to be aware that he wasn't there. I'm going to pretend not to care that he was out all night. Pick up yogurt. We're having some curry.
Mm-hmm. That's what you get, Tom, for being cheeky.
Yeah.
You were cheeky at the top, and that's what you get.
Yep.
So, final thoughts time. Eileen, again, you and I have slightly different final thoughts, so why don't you go first, and then I will rip yours apart.
I do enjoy this one. I like the con background to it. I like that. I think it's got some really strong filming aspects to it, and I do like that. I think there's some set details that really are really nice, especially in Spicer's house. I like that it doesn't end with the obligatory confession by the murderers that explain everything. It does you do have to think through some things, and I don't mind that. I like that. I'm gonna just put that right out there. I like that aspect of it.
My thing is, if Midsomer Murders starts leaving way too much for your interpretation, the whole thing falls apart anyways, because it's, you know what I mean? Like, so much of this stuff is predicated on a lot of just like, just let stuff go, But if you leave too much stuff to go, it falls through like so much Swiss cheese. I feel like with this episode, they spend too much time with the death traps and not enough time on create and kind of this elaborate con, which basically just gets all explained to us. I found myself kind of a little bored watching it, because again, it's like once you get to you get to these kind of sadistic, like very sadistic killers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing with Midsomer. Killers tend to be crazy. It tends to be based on love. It tends to be based on like, and while this was presumably about revenge, as soon as those two are sitting there drinking champagne and watching a murder, like on their television and laughing about it, it becomes something else. And I think if we're going to go that route, then we need a little more explanation of, like, we need that interview scene. We need that interview scene between the two of them where they're kind of like, yeah, they did this. We decided to get revenge. You know, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed killing. You know, we need that bit. The fact that it's just kind of left dangling. It's just, there's so much left dangling and unexplained in this episode. I just ended up, like, when I was done watching it, I just felt confused.
I did not feel confused. Yeah.
That's because you keep adding your own interpretation.
Well, I mean, I fill in blanks. I mean, you know, maybe I'm doing my magical Tom Barnaby sense in there, but you know. Yeah.
I think that's fair. I just, for me, this isn't a David Lynch movie. I don't need to interpret. I don't really want to watch this stuff and try to reinterpret what's supposed to be happening, you know? I feel like that's part of their job.
Yeah.
This is an hour and a half. Like, this is a long episode. It's a long episode where we have to watch a lot of people being killed brutally. I don't know. It's funny too, is I remembered enjoying this episode more the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know, it was only on the rewatch that I was kind of like, oh, it's missing something.
Yeah.
I guess I feel like this episode is missing a little something, and I can't quite pinpoint what it is, other than, like, there's so much that's just left sort of up for interpretation.
Yeah.
And yet, I think we're supposed to feel like, oh, they've wrapped it up perfectly at the end.
They never wrap everything up perfectly. And very few murders in real life ever wrapped up perfectly. So
Yeah, again, if this was in real life, again, Midsomer would be a hellhole on Earth. And most of the time when they don't wrap up things perfectly, it's because they've left a big plot hole.
Yeah. Or forgotten to solve a murder.
Yeah.
Like they did in Electric Vendetta.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
the plot holes should be accidental, not just no one cares.
Yeah, see, for me, I think it was just like a little bit of, we respect the viewer to kind of fill in some things on their own.
They've never done that before. They've never done that since. That's everything we want to talk about. If you have anything you want to discuss about the Hidden Depths or Midsomer Murders, please feel free to email us at welcometomidsomer@gmail.com. Also, please, we are still collecting your stories for our anniversary episode. So please tell us what got into the show. We love hearing from you all. What's your favorite Midsomer episodes? Anything like that, we would love to hear. So you can just welcometomidsomer@gmail.com. Please say if we can use your email in the show. Otherwise, we can just thank you anonymously. We are also Welcome to Midsomer on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube. We are uploading our old episodes. Slowly but surely, they're getting up there. Getting nice response on that. So please follow us in all these places. That's where you'll find out what episodes we are doing next. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing to us or rating and reviewing us on iTunes. It really helps people find us. Tell all your friends about us. We're going to be back soon with a new episode, and we hope you will join us again. As we take the road out of Midsomer, we want to thank you all for listening and remind you that in Midsomer, being a con artist can be murder.
And usually is.
Welcome to Midsomer is produced by Eric Buscher and Eileen Becker. All clips in this podcast are used in compliance with the U.S. Copyrights Act fair use exception for criticism and commentary. Our logo and podcast art were designed by Smeedrai. Our theme music is by the infamous Space. He only has a few roles in IMDb, including Elizabeth I, but not Elizabeth II.
Elizabeth II, The Revenge.
He's not in Elizabeth II, Electric Boogaloo.